On this episode, we look back at the devastating 2004 tsunami and the legacy it left that persists to this day.
So whether you remember it happening or were just a child when it happened, you'll be fascinated by this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to learn how to be woke, but instead I was misunderstood and they kept giving me joke, and I never bothered to correct them.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 23 years ago. Fell in love with the fact that my summer, winter, fall, and spring clothes were all the same, so I never left.
It's good, man. You've got to get to my level of enlightenment when it comes to clothes. What am I going to wear today? Shorts and a black t-shirt. How's that?
That's right.
There we go.
Jeans and a black t-shirt.
It never changes, and why would it?
No.
And for those that don't know, joke is delicious rice porridge.
That's right. Actually, it played a role in Hangover 2. There was a joke in Hangover 2.
Yeah, he was talking about how they give it to old people because it's pablum and boring and easy to chew.
Yeah.
Maybe it says something about me, but I like it.
We want to say a quick thank you to one of our patrons, Megan Smith, who supports us at the show shout-out level. Stick around after our look back at the 2004 tsunami to hear why Greg and I like to get sweaty with Megan, but only in a virtual sense.
Trust me, it'll make sense eventually.
We want to give a big thanks to all of our other patrons who support the show. Patrons get every episode a day early, behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, a heads-up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. But best of all, patrons like Megan also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. On this week's bonus show, we chatted about the incredibly upsetting accusations by a listener that we are too woke.
Got to call that guy a wambulance.
And we had a discussion on the hopefully impending legalization of same-sex marriage and perhaps even gambling in Thailand and what those two things might look like in reality. And we also had a few thoughts on a report that said Thailand gets the highest number of scam calls and SMSs of any country in Asia. To learn how to become a patron and get all this good stuff, plus full access to over 700 bonus and regular back episodes, click the support button at the top of our website.
Time to take up gambling, I guess.
That's right.
I'm sure I can beat the house. There must be a way. All right, before we get started, I want to read a message from our buddy Gene. Now, Ed, you and I have been talking on recent shows about the terrible air quality up in Chiang Mai. There's been several days where the air quality has been the worst in the world, and that's not good for anything. So a couple of times it's been mentioned on the show. But one of our longtime listeners, Gene, who lives in Chiang Mai, sent us quite an interesting email, and it says this. I live in Chiang Mai. The reality up here is not exactly as you might think. The headlines blaring worst pollution in the world refer to individual days or short groups of days. Most days here are relatively fine. Most tourists and locals are living normally, and I see very few masks. About the past 10 days, the AQI was under 100 most days, many less than 50. True, many days this season have been worse, but it just isn't all that bad. Overall, we are nowhere near the world's worst pollution 99% of the time. General statements are not good indicators of the situation. What do you think of that?
Interesting. This is a good point. When I've been up to Chiang Mai, it's been fine, but I think it was just time of the year. So at this point is well taken that it might be bad, but it's not every day of the year.
Right. And he continues, he said, don't get me wrong. You're right. The will to fix it is not present and the politics around all this is awful. This needs to be discussed and the government needs the push to solve this very solvable problem. Yeah. So, there we go. So it's interesting to hearing from someone on the ground because, of course, we're totally removed from the situation down here in Bangkok. We've got our own problems with air. But maybe it's not as bad as we read. And, of course, you know how the press works, right? No one's going to run a giant headline blaring, air not bad today.
Yeah, or right. not as bad as we thought. There's no, they don't retract stuff. So anyway, that's a very valid point from Gene.
Yeah, good. Thanks for writing in, Gene. All right, on this episode, we are going to do another history episode, but this one's a little bit different because we're going to be talking about the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. Now, for listeners who have been here a while, like Ed and I, this seems like a strange thing to classify as a history episode, because to us, you can probably classify it as recent history, like we remember this pretty vividly. But Ed and I were talking recently, and we realized that it's been a full 20 years since this happened, and that's an entire generation that has gone by.
Sure.
There are probably people who listen to the show, many of them may even be living in Bangkok, who were still in diapers when the tsunami happened, and for whom this is a vague historical event that they've only read about in books or seen clips of on YouTube or TikTok or whatever the hell the kids use these days. So we have a bit of a unique structure for the show. So let's go over the basics of what happened. And then Ed and I will talk a little bit about our own memories of the event. And later we'll be joined by our pal Hugh Van S, who has published a short book that's a very personal story of his experiences as he rushed down to Phuket the day after the tsunami hit to see if he could find a friend of his who had been staying in Khao Lak, which was one of the hardest hit areas. So Ed, it's sort of to kind of hit us both when we were discussing this, like, yeah, it's easy to think 20 years, but you think that's a whole generation of people that have grown up and are now living here to whom this is a distant memory, not like a vague thing that happened way over there in the past.
You know, this happens. I have a little bit of insight on these time dilation issues because when I interact with my students, I sometimes talk about something and then I go, "Oh my God, you guys are only 19."
Right.
You know? So this literally happened before you're born. You know, so if I mention something like the tsunami, of course they've heard about it. But I mean, just because of my age and how long I've been here, I might know way more than they do about something.
You know, it might not be a perfect parallel, but the tsunami was sort of like Thailand's Princess Di moment. Like a lot of people can remember where they were when this happened. And it was just such massive news and a massive impact to the country.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, I know you're going to kind of recount the story. But I just remember we hear the initial news and you're like, wow, this is bad. And then 2 hours later, it's like, oh my God, this is like really bad. And then it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Right. And then of course, eventually it's essentially an Earth-wide catastrophe when you look at the total number of people who died in the whole thing. It's literally of epic proportions.
Right. So let's go over what happened, shall we? On December 26, 2004, that's Boxing Day for us in the Commonwealth, just before 8 a.m., a 9.1 magnitude earthquake hit just off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. Now, if you're not a seismologist, that isn't just a big earthquake, it is a massive earthquake. It's hard to fathom just how big this earthquake was, actually. In fact, since 1900, the only earthquakes recorded with a greater magnitude were the 1960 Valdivia earthquake with a magnitude of 9.5 and the 1964 Alaska earthquake in Prince William Sound with a magnitude of 9.2. So only 2 earthquakes since 1900 have been bigger than that.
That's crazy.
The energy released was 1,500 times the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Seismic waves were felt around the entire planet and up to the state of Oklahoma, where vertical movements of 3 millimeters were recorded.
Wow, I didn't know that. I did not know that it went that far. I mean, I'm going to tell my story in a minute. So I felt something in Bangkok, but I had no idea in Oklahoma there was movement.
It's crazy. Harmonic oscillation in the Earth's surfaces was still measurable up to 4 months after the earthquake, and it even caused the entire planet to wobble on its axis, shortening the length of a day by 2.68 microseconds.
Holy shit, I did not know that.
Yeah. Underwater along the fault line, it was a complete shit show. There was a 4 to 5 meter movement vertically. Massive underwater shelves collapsed, causing huge landslides, and the momentum of the water displaced by this tectonic uplift also dragged massive slabs of rock, each weighing millions of tons, as far as 10 kilometers across the ocean floor. So it was a huge, huge thing.
Craziness.
Yeah. Now, of course, that was just the first part of the equation. Obviously, that much land moving that quickly displaced a gargantuan amount of water, and concentric waves immediately began to travel outward from the epicenter. Now, from the time the earthquake hit to the time the first waves started hitting land in Thailand and some of the other areas, it was a few hours. Obviously, in Indonesia, it was much sooner than that. However, there was no tsunami warning systems in the Indian Ocean. And quite frankly, before this, unless you lived in a place where tsunamis were a possibility, no one really knew what the warning signs were. There are plenty of stories of people watching the water along their beaches mysteriously start to recede far out into the distance, leaving hundreds and hundreds of meters of empty sand. Most people simply had no idea what was going on, and when the waves finally came, were caught completely by surprise.
That's right.
In fact, the last major tsunami in this area was after the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, so you can see why people weren't prepared.
Yeah, I mean, I would not have known. I mean, now, since the tsunami, I'm more educated, but, you know, of course, the water receded, which I now know is a bad sign, you know.
Right.
So,
yeah.
which I would have been just like a lot of people, unfortunately, who, when the water receded, I probably would have walked out like, oh, this is cool, you know?
Yeah. And that's something that come out of this, right? Is like now
Sure.
the immense publicity around it. Now almost everyone knows that if the water starts to go out, like you better start running, right? That's common knowledge. But back then, no one knew.
Run the other way. Yeah. I did not know that.
Now, we're not going to go into huge detail about all this because I think everyone should know the basics. And there are just too many stories to tell and too many details to cover to get into here. So let's narrow our focus just to Thailand and talk about what happened here. Have you seen any footage on YouTube or even the actually pretty good movie, The Impossible? Have you ever seen that one?
You know, it was funny. I'm glad you brought it up. You know, the movie The Impossible, I think it has a bad name because it doesn't reveal anything about what the movie's about. It's too generic, and but it's actually a pretty good movie, especially because it does educate you about how scary the tsunami was. So I'm a fan of this movie. I mean, it's just, I think a lot of people, I mean, I know it was reasonably successful, but I don't think a lot of people watch it or realize it's actually a pretty good representation of the truth of how scary and crazy it was.
Yeah. It came out in 2012, and it's not the best movie in the world, but it's pretty good.
No, I recommend it. The special effects are great, and it shows you how incredibly massive and scary the tsunami was.
Yeah. Also stars a pre-Spider-Man Tom Holland when he was like 15 years old. He's pretty good.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Now, if you've seen that movie, you know what happened, or any videos on YouTube, you know what happened. As the water rushed in, the waves grew higher and higher, up to 30 meters high by some reports, traveling up to 4 kilometers inland. Billions and billions of gallons of seawater crashed into the land with incredible force, destroying everything in their path. Cars were tossed like toys, buildings were torn apart in an instant. Factories, power plants, hotels, houses, schools, temples, roads, farms, they were all simply destroyed in the blink of an eye. And for the unfortunate people caught in the water's path, their fate was sealed. And even if they managed to struggle to the top and take a breath, they were still caught in a terrible swirling eddies of jagged metal and sharp concrete, boats, roofs, electrical wires, telephone poles, shattered glass, raw sewage, mud, dirt, and rocks, and animals and humans alike all screaming and trying to find their way out of danger.
Dude, you know, I of course, when I heard the news about it and saw an initial video, I was like, okay, wow, this is crazy, this is bad. But I remember thinking, well, I can swim. So I remember thinking that, you know, I probably would have been okay. But then the more I learned about it, and then eventually, you know, it was years later when I saw that movie Impossible, like we said, and they just show like there's jagged shit like caught up in the you know, it's a massive violent flood with like sharp objects like swirling around. So it's not like just because you can swim, it doesn't mean you're okay.
Yeah, it's not like it's nice clear water. It's like you're swimming in a big bowl of stew, and instead of meat and potatoes, you've got jagged pieces of wood and glass and metal.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, you're not okay just because. Oh, hey, I can swim pretty well. No, it's not. It's not like that.
No, it would just been horrible. So it was a disaster on an unimaginable scale, and one which absolutely no one was prepared for. The countries that were hardest hit were Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, Somalia, Myanmar, the Maldives, Malaysia, Tanzania, Seychelles, Bangladesh, and even South Africa, Yemen, Kenya, and Madagascar. Major locations damaged in Thailand included the western shores of Phuket, the resort town of Khao Lak, Krabi, Satun, Ranong, and Trang, and small offshore islands like Koh Ratcha Yai, Koh Phi Phi, and the Similan Archipelago. In Thailand, 5,390 people were killed, with a further 2,817 who were never found.
Wow, that many. Wait, are you saying almost 3,000 people have never been found?
Just disappeared, gone.
Wow, I didn't know that. I did not know that.
In total, almost 185,000 people were confirmed dead from the tsunami, with a further 44,000 who have never been recovered.
Oh yeah, crazy. And again, it's like I said earlier, you knew it was bad at first, and then, remember the days after where it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Right.
Like it really was a true global tragedy, and Thailand was just one of a bunch of countries who were hit. But when you are in the firing line of this thing, it really. It was months. It was the thing that everyone in Thailand talked about. It affected a lot of different people. A lot of people knew someone who was affected, if not actually killed in tsunami. And pretty much all of us who were here, like you mentioned earlier, we have a story about where we were when we heard about the tsunami.
What's your story about it? Tell us what happened.
Well, it's funny. I have a very specific memory of this. So back then I was teaching, but not at my university, and I actually taught a lot on the weekend.
Okay.
Overall, I worked a pretty normal work week in terms of my hours, but I worked on the weekend. And so I have this memory of going into work at an office tower on Saturn. It's 9 a.m. or it was probably 8:45 on a Sunday morning. I'm on the 20th floor, and I'm walking up to the office, and it's dark. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to teach today. It's dark. And then I walk up and there's a note on the glass, and it said, the office is closed due to the disaster. And right around that time, I felt a little shake.
Really?
Yeah. And I didn't know what was going on. Eventually, I figured out about the tsunami. So I think it happened. I think you mentioned earlier, it happened around 8 a.m. But I don't know. I was either sleeping or in the shower, so I didn't know anything about it happening. I got in a taxi, went to work, but I learned later that the office girls had been in the office when the tsunami took place, and they felt the building shake.
Wow!
And then they're listening to the radio, and the Thai government was saying, "This is an emergency situation. Like, go home." So they shut the office. So they had been there when the tsunami happened. The girls were in the office. And they shut the office down and then put a note on the door. Like, classes are canceled, because, we had students coming. They put a note, like, classes canceled. And so when I got there, they were gone. And then I believe I felt an aftershock.
Interesting. And you bring up an important point, too, and this is something we'll talk about with Hugh later on, but this was way before Facebook and Twitter and things like that. Like, the information just wasn't there.
That's right.
Unless you saw it on TV or heard it on the radio or heard from gossip from a friend in person.
So what about you? What were you doing?
Well, for me, it was very interesting because I wasn't even in Thailand. Actually, my then girlfriend and I, we flew out to the Netherlands on Christmas Day about midnight.
Oh, okay.
So we got on the plane at about midnight, and it was I remember being a great flight because it was completely empty, right? So you could stretch out across the whole row and go to sleep,
Cool. That's cool.
Yeah, it was great. So we landed in Amsterdam about I don't know, 8 in the morning or something like that. And we went to our friend's house. We were visiting our friend's mom in Wynand. And by the time we got to their place, it was, say, 9 a.m. And that would have been about, 11 noon in Thailand. So the tsunami had already happened when we were in the air.
Yeah, so you basically you completely missed it.
Completely missed it, yeah. But we saw it on the TV, and I remember we were eating breakfast, and we were chatting and catching up and in a good mood and everything, a little bit jet lagged, but we're fine. And we see on the bottom of the TV, like tsunami in Thailand, 22 people missing. We're like, oh, that's no good. And then it just went up.
Oh, yeah.
And then half an hour later, it was like, we've updated our numbers, 140 people missing.
Sure.
300 people missing, 600 people missing,
Right.
100 people confirmed dead. And we were like, wow, this is not good. And then just throughout the day, it just went on and on and on and got worse and worse and worse. And of course, we were eager to start our vacation. We were out and about. We were doing the touristy things. But, and again, there wasn't messages coming into our phones and stuff like this. This was before easy roaming. The first iPhone came out in 2007. So this was definitely dumb phone.
Sure, right.
times, right? So yeah, it was a terrible, terrible thing. And phone calls were made. And I remember my then girlfriend, someone she knew, her friend was in Phuket and was missing. So she had a personal connection to it all. So that put a little bit of a
Right.
Paul over the trip.
Sure. No, I mean, many people we knew, as far as I know, among our crew or friends, I think none of them were absolutely directly affected, but definitely friends of ours had friends who were lost. Like I know, like so it was kind of just 2 steps away from us, or at least me. It was not anyone I knew.
Yeah, I think everyone knew someone who was affected.
That's
in
right.
Some way,
That's right.
Yeah. And it was funny. So we were only there for 10 days or so, and we came back. And then I remember the recovery efforts were still ongoing, and I felt really compelled to do something to try and help. And I talked to my boss at the time, and I was like, "Hey, can I just like go down there and just show up and see if I can do something?" And he was like, "Yeah, if you want to, like take a couple of days off and go down." And I remember I showed up at the office and I had my bag packed. I had a backpack ready to go. And I was going to go to the office and buy a ticket because I heard that there was no one was going there anymore. Like there was no tourists going down to Phuket.
Sure.
They were all coming back. So I heard it was really easy to get a ticket. So I went to work with the intention of buying a ticket and just showing up and trying to help. But that morning I was reading more news about it, and basically people were saying, like, we know there's a lot of people that want to help, but unless you're a professional recoverer or paramedic or something like that,
oh, I see,
don't come.
Right.
You're just going to confuse things, and you're probably going to cause more problems than you want to solve.
Gotcha.
So I never went.
Oh, gotcha.
They just said there's nowhere for you to go. No one's going to be able to take care of you. You're going to be on your own. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be lost, and you're just going to cause problems. So I never went, but
well, yeah. I want to say this. I mean, there's so much that could be said about the tsunami, but I'll tell you this. I have a very clear memory of the months after the tsunami and how awesome Thai people were. And I just heard this. I heard this over and over and over again from tourists or tourist families. The feedback from foreigners was Thai people are incredibly helpful. Thai people down in Phuket just came out of the woodwork to help, obviously, Thai people who were affected, but also foreigners. I mean, I just heard this over and over and over again, and those people stepped up.
They did. So let's go over to the interview that I did with our pal Hugh Van S. Hugh has written a little book called, and I mean that, I don't want to pass it off as like a trifle or anything like this, but it's a short book. It's called Hell in Paradise, One Man's Quest to Search for His Friends After the 2004 Tsunami in the south of Thailand. So he had a much more vivid and personal and close experience with things than you and I did. So I thought it'd be cool to have him on the show to talk about his experiences, because he went down there and he was directly involved in some recovery efforts and things like that. So let's go over to a quick interview I had with Hugh and hear what it was like for him. All right, well, joining us as a guest on this special episode is a man whose goatee majesty rivals only my own. And we're talking with Mr. Hugh Van S. Hugh, welcome to the Bangkok Podcast.
Thank you, Greg. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to meet you tonight. And we wanted to have you on the show because we got to chatting a little while ago about a book you wrote, and you have a very personal experience with the tsunami and how it affected you and your life and your job and the rest of Thailand. So I thought it would be really interesting to have you on here because, as we heard, Ed and I only have sort of secondhand accounts of it, and we were in Bangkok the whole time. But your story was a lot more harrowing and a bit more tragic. So I thought it'd be really, really interesting to hear your side to provide some context and color to the whole thing. So what can you tell us about your story and the tsunami and what happened?
Right. Well, by 2004, I had been living in Thailand for about 17 years, and I was quite stressed in a job that I was employed at. And in March of 2004, through my brother, I met Erwin. He's a Belgian guy that had been here for 4 years and was managing a diamond polishing factory, making triple excellent ideal cut stones, so really the highest quality of diamonds. And at the time, he was looking for an operation manager to further grow the business. There were about 200 people employed at the time when I arrived. And my first interview was amazing. It took 4 hours. I mean, you never heard of anybody going for an interview that takes 4 hours because it just kind of clicked.
Right.
Erwin was the MD at this factory that I was interviewing at. Originally from Belgium, also bald like myself.
Handsome, you mean?
Handsomely bald. And it clicked, and we took, went through the whole factory together, and it was such a nice change from the previous job where it was just stress after stress. That to make a long story short, he gave me the job, and I started there in June of 2004. So worked closely with him. I had an office next to his, and we really grew the business from 240 people to over 400 by end of the year. And he and his wife were childless, chosen as not to have children, and they enjoyed scuba diving around the world. They had gone to the Maldives, really, the major spots around the world where you go scuba diving. So they had planned their Christmas to go down south, whereas my family and I'm married to a Thai. I have 2 kids, and at that time they were 5 and 2. And we could have easily chosen to go down to the south, but we said, let's go to Koh Chang, because even though I had been here for 17 years, I never really went to Koh Chang. So 4 hours in the car with 2 young kids, that should be doable. So the moment we arrived on Koh Chang was the 26th of December around 10 a.m. And we were sitting waiting for the ferry. And of course, what do? We just have a bowl of noodles. And on the TV, we heard that there was a tsunami or an earthquake in Indonesia. But, not really hearing anything about Thailand at the time. I guess the wave was still on the way. And so we just didn't really think of anything of it. Went to the hotel, checked in, kids at the pool the whole day. And it was only in the evening, back into the room, when we turned on the TV, where we saw the extent of the damage. So it was really that whole afternoon by the pool, oblivious of what had happened. Just know there was an earthquake in Indonesia.
Yeah.
So then in the evening, it's like, okay, this is serious, because the whole of south of Thailand was hit as well. So started right away calling to various people to find out, because they didn't answer their phone. Calling repeatedly, messages, nothing was done. So the next day, I just spent the whole day trying to piece together, okay, where they were staying, because we didn't know how they had booked. Did they book it through the company or anything? So the GM at the time went back to the factory and found out they actually booked at the Sofitel in Khao Lak, which by then we heard was one of the worst hit areas on Thailand. So then the next day I said, I called the owner of the company, who was on his way to Bangkok to spend Christmas holidays in Bangkok. I say, listen, I'll cut my holiday short. I'll drive to Bangkok, drop the family in at home, and I'll just fly the first flight to Phuket. So that was then the 28th in the evening of December.
It must have been a nerve-wracking couple of days.
Yeah, and the plane was completely empty, but it was only Don Mueang at the time.
Right.
There was no Suvarnabhumi yet, and the whole airport was completely packed with people that had changed their flight at the last minute.
Chaos.
So yeah, chaos. But then you finally get on the plane. It was completely empty. I think me and 2 other guys that were on the plane down to Phuket.
Wow.
Even though the airport was completely full.
It's eerie, eh?
It was very eerie.
Yeah.
And then you arrive in Phuket, it's already dark. So, you drive through town, and at that time I was just looking for a hotel for us to stay. And we just didn't see anything of the tsunami in Phuket town, at least where we drove. I guess we were on the correct side, because then the next day we drove down and tried to figure out where they had been or where they were, and just trying to piece the clues together that we found out, and spent 4 days down south between Phuket and Khao Lak to just trying to find them.
Yeah. And you were in touch with his family the whole time. So you were sort of like getting all these calls from everyone.
Exactly.
Your own family was probably worried as well.
Exactly. And the added difficulty at the time, mobiles were still a new thing. So the network quality down south was just horrible. Right. You had to try to dial in again and again and again before you actually had a live number. And that added to the frustrations for sure.
Yeah. And for people who are hearing this, who are on the younger side of things, you lucky bastards, and don't know what it was like back then. This is way before Facebook and Twitter and everything like that. Like, this was the primitive era, right?
It was.
Information was really hard to come by.
Most of the time was just still, newspapers or the television.
In a best case scenario, you're looking at a multi-hour delay to learn
sure.
of anything new.
For
at all.
sure. And even, I mean, it was good that by that time I already spoke a good level of Thai. So that first night on the 26th, just spend the whole night trying to go from channel to channel because everybody was covering it, right?
Right.
Even the Thai channels, just listening and trying to figure out anything because we thought they went to the Similan Islands to go scuba diving there. But I guess you had to go out of Khao Lak to get to the Similan Islands. At that time, wasn't aware of that. So
Okay.
just trying to piece the clues together to find out what had happened and where they had gone and things like that.
Now you wrote a very interesting short book about this experience, Hell in Paradise, which is it's a quick read. You gave me a copy a little while ago and I read it, but it's interesting and it's a really insightful look at this experience for you. It's a very personal story, but it also gives you some really good insight into how the Thai people reacted and how you were feeling and how other people were feeling and how just absolutely lost and confused people were because no one knew what to do.
Exactly.
No one knew where to go and no one knew who to talk to.
Right. I mean, we've, in the past, when I was here, we've had, the tough floods in the south, I think it was 2006 or even earlier that really the whole south was flooded and we, did donations and all that. But a disaster of this proportion, in living memory, you never heard of something like this, right? Okay, earthquakes, yes, this is something you hear all the time, but a massive tsunami that covers almost half the world.
It was like a regional catastrophe.
Exactly,
like
and
cataclysmic.
India, Sri Lanka. I mean, you name it. All those countries were affected by it, and it was so eerie that you what to do, right? What do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, exactly.
And it was really by my wife just saying, Hugh, you gotta go look for them. They don't have any family here. It's not that anybody in the factory is going to look for the boss. You're his second right hand man. You got to go look for them.
Right.
The reason why I decided to write a book, because those 4 days, even now, I mean, it's like you said earlier, it's 20-year anniversary of the tsunami, right? But those 4 days down south, even now, it's still so vividly with me. As I close my eyes and I'm reliving those 4 days. So I decided about 7 years ago to let's put this on paper. Let's just see what happens if I start writing this down. And it helped a little bit. I'm not saying that it helped with the healing, but in a way it gave a little bit of closure. Okay, now it's on paper. It's no longer just a story in my mind. Okay, it's something I lived and relived in my thoughts, but never really, let's put this down on paper. So again, I wrote it just from the day that we left to Koh Chang to the 31st when we returned back to Bangkok. And then about 2020, 21, my son, who was about 18 at the time, asked me, do you still have that story? Because I was talking to my friend about Tsunami and I told him you wrote a book, and I said, yeah, sure. So I looked it up, found it in my documents folder, and basically dusted it off virtually, added a beginning and an ending, and then really tried to figure out to really put it in the story. And then I sent it to some friends and family, like my mom, a couple of colleagues, a couple of friends that I trust their judgments, and the reviews were so nice that I said, okay, let's give it a try. So I just went on Google, and that was 2022 in the beginning, February. Looked, okay, Penguin was the first publishing house, it's, I think the world's most famous one. And then we had Olympia Publishers out of the UK. I said, okay, sounds familiar. And they had a submit your manuscript on their website. So I just submitted it and didn't hear anything for weeks. I kind of forgot about it already. And then all of a sudden, an email in my inbox from Olympia. It's like, hold on, what's this? Dear Mr. Vanessa, after careful review with the editing team, we accept your story to be published.
Oh, wow.
And then basically from that email all the way to the publication date of July 2023, it was basically the whole processing of promotion and editing and rewriting and all that, but which took about a year before that was complete. But, it was beyond all expectations. I really didn't realize or expect it to be, accepted for publication. Yeah. And so far the reviews have been fantastic. The only bad review, or could be construed a bit negative, is that it's too short. But I purposely did it too short because people don't have time. Everything is short, right? All short snippets.
TikTok generation, isn't it? So no spoilers, and I recommend everyone get the book because it's a really interesting insight into the whole thing. But you did eventually find your boss and his wife, and they were victims of the tsunami.
Yes.
So what did you take away from that? What did that help you understand or learn about Thailand, Thai culture?
Well, first of all, I think nobody was expecting something like this to happen. Nobody was prepared for something that was clear. I think most countries that were hit were also not prepared. But the solidarity that I saw during those 4 days, the way that Thai people came together and really tried to make a difference for those that have lost or had lost people, or those that are still looking for people. I mean, there's still, I don't know how many, but there's still so many people still unaccounted for, even after 20, just never found. Right. So that must be really tough. I mean, that they probably perished, but to not have any closure on that, I think that's tough. So I think in a way we were so fortunate to have found them at that time, because it was just unrecognizable. You couldn't really piece together who those people were, because when we found them, it was like 3 days after the disaster had happened. So lukewarm water, those temperatures, you can only imagine, right? So it was tough, and for me to just go through the temple where we found them is just, I was in shock. It's like just to realize, okay, where do I start? Because nobody, I figured, he was a big guy, bald like us. He had just done a teeth bleaching a couple of weeks before, so you could figure we spot him right away, but that was just not the case, And then the added difficulty that, they were all the corpses were just wrapped in shrouds with, 3 places tightly tied. So you can imagine if you have to really start untying them. So that first half hour is just walking through those rows of, like a zombie, just here and there where a shroud was open, you kind of look and that doesn't look, he has hair, like, or whatever.
Process of elimination.
But it was only by the fortunate event that the day that I drove back to Bangkok from Koh Chang, the driver of Erwin, who had been his driver for 4 years, really knew them. He said, listen, I can't sit here in Bangkok. Do you mind if I take the company car and drive down to Phuket? I said, yeah, please go ahead. I'll see you there. And it was him that actually found him and recognized, look at the shirt, look at the way he tucked in his T-shirt into his pants, the sandals, and just kind of confirmed by the wedding ring, which was engraved. But that was the only way, that was where we basically confirmed them.
It's funny you say the solidarity and the help and the sort of the community spirit that was on display, because Ed and I talk about this all the time, and as foreigners here, it's often easy to get frustrated with how things work, but we always have to remind ourselves that like whether you're in a bank or a shopping mall or a government office or paying your electricity bill or doing your taxes or something like that, there's always someone that's trying to help, even if they're not giving you the same level of service as you would expect or hope. They're trying.
Yes.
Right. And I think when you find someone, even as something as mundane as a bank transaction, when you find someone who is helping you and who gets you and who's trying to make things better, it's like, oh, yes. I can imagine for something like this situation that you were in was just even way more emotionally intense, and must have been just really, encouraging is the wrong word, but just to know that there were people who understood what you were going through and who were trying to help, doing the best they could in this overwhelming situation.
Right.
I mean, how do you think that Thailand has changed? Like, it's been a long time. It's been just over 20 years. That's long enough that people can forget about it and it's passed out of memory. And now you've got, an entire new generation that has only read about it in books and has just heard stories. So what's the legacy of this in Thailand?
Well, I think what is nice to see is that every time some sort of disaster, be it floods or wood fires or forest fires, anything that is on a large scale, you still have that ingrained quality of wanting to help, although you don't really see it through the government. But the ordinary people, donation drives. Every time we had a company working in a company, I can always see that there is definitely a concern for their fellow Thais, especially maybe those that are less off, orphanages, home for the disabled. We always had some sort of donation drive or helping out, and I think that is still something that helps. But Thailand, as you've been here a long time, I mean, wasn't it, I don't know how many years afterwards, that they did a test on the tsunami warning systems, and pretty much figured out that none of them were working again anymore. So there is, of course, always that. And that is something you have to always keep in mind, that it might be, you know, it's the new thing. So they try to, you know, same with everywhere, same with COVID, right?
Yeah.
There is COVID. Okay, all these new rules. Same with everything. So
didn't they also figure out that like half the traffic cameras in the city don't work either?
Yeah.
Or something like that? So.
Exactly. So.
Well, Hugh, thanks for coming on and chatting about it. It's a really it's a sad story, but it's also a bit of an inspiring story. It's a very interesting one, and your book gives some, like I said, some really good insights into, you know, how things work in a time of incredible crisis like that.
Right. Well, I brought you 10 copies for maybe your future guests, or maybe give to your friends and family, whatever, spread the word.
We will do a giveaway. How's that on the podcast?
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Where can people find it?
So locally, it's available at Asia Books in Kinokuniya. It's also available on Amazon.com. There is an ebook available on Kindle if needed. Of course, on Olympia website as well. So pretty much available worldwide. And now I'm just, trying my best to promote it as much as possible on my own website, on, you know, my own social media channels, and by talking to as many people as possible, and hopefully spread the word.
And the Mighty Bangkok podcast.
And the Mighty Bangkok podcast. Yeah. So thank you very much for the opportunity. This is, hopefully it'll spread the word a bit, and take it from there.
Hell in Paradise by Hugh Van Es. Very interesting story. And thanks again for coming on and talking about it. Everyone go out, buy a copy through whatever method you can, and you know, let's learn from this and get better.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All the best.
Wow, that was intense. But that's how real it was. And you and I all know people who knew people like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So really, really nice to sit down with you. And you almost can't imagine the kind of, you know, mental anguish and stress that would place on someone. And if you've never gone through something like that, just be thankful that we have never had to deal with that kind of stuff, because that's not easy. And kudos to Hugh for writing a book about it and telling people about the story. And again, it's a really interesting book because it does show what you said, Ed, the kindness and the community that the Thai people
absolutely
really came together and showed there.
Absolutely,
so,
for sure.
Many thanks, Hugh. And again, if you're online, check out the book Hell in Paradise. It's a short read, but it's a very interesting one and a good insight into this historical, very important event for Thailand. And one last thing, Ed, I wanted to mention this before we go. There are two restaurants in the JW Marriott, in the basement of the JW Marriott on Sukhumvit Soi 2. There is Su and Nami. And I don't know if you remember, but they originally opened those restaurants as one restaurant in 2003 called Tsunami. That was the name of the restaurant.
Correct.
And when the tsunami happened, they split the restaurant in two and made Su and Nami. I thought that was always interesting.
You want to know why I remember this and know this is that after the tsunami happened, I was with a buddy of mine, and we were either in the JW Marriott or we were nearby, and he saw that the restaurant was called Tsunami, and we walked into the restaurant and he complained about the name.
No way, really?
For real. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they changed the name because of him, but I was with a buddy of mine, a Swedish guy, and he was like, "Wait a minute, this place is called Tsunami? This is totally inappropriate."
Yeah.
And we went in, and I don't know, I stepped back a little bit, and he walked in and bitched and moaned to someone about it. So that's why I do remember this. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that just goes to show the depth of effect this had on Thailand.
No doubt. Yeah. No doubt. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'd like to say thank you to Megan Smith for lending us her support at the show shout-out level. Greg, what did you find out about Megan?
Well, as it turns out, Megan is got a similar story to our buddy Vinny, our pal Vinny in New Jersey, who's thinking of coming to Thailand. And I had a couple of nice emails back and forth with Megan. And she said, "I have no idea what you should say about me, but I live in central New York. I'm a mom to 2 Thai kiddos, have learned to speak and read Thai via online tutoring from the US for the last 4 years." Another one of these Farangs that we don't like, who speak better Thai than us. There's a lot of them out there.
There are.
And I'm not so secretly hoping that my husband will be convinced that we should move to Thailand in the near future and never return to the States. My kids, who are 7 and 8, are already on board and beg at least weekly to go back to Thailand. I first visited Thailand back in 2004 when I was in high school. I love listening to the Bangkok podcast most often while working out in my basement after my kids are asleep for the night.
Yeah.
So there we go. That's why you and I accompany Megan while she's getting sweaty. So there was nothing dirty.
I see. Okay.
But I think that people, when they're working out, they want lots of motivation. And you and I are nothing if not motivational.
Of course.
Of course.
We're motivating because people are like, we don't want to be like Ed and Greg.
We want to learn. We want to actually learn to speak Thai. So that's what she did.
And we want to lose some weight.
And she's doing that too. Damn you, Megan. You're so inspirational. I should put you in touch with our pal Vinny, Megan. You and him can talk and organize your things and get your families over here, and we can start a little Bangkok podcast sponsored community of expats in Thailand. I like it. Thanks for your support, Megan.
Thank you, Megan. Alrighty. A final thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping in our never-ending quest for cool content. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yeah, you can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail through our website that we'll feature on the show. Hit me up on threads at BKK Greg. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take it easy, and we will see you back here next week.
Absolutely.